The girl in the alley. The city at night was never truly quiet. Even in winter, it hummed with life. Neon signs blinked above the narrow streets, spilling pink, blue, and gold light over wet pavements. Somewhere far away, a train rattled over metal tracks. The air smelled faintly of rain, exhaust fumes, and roasted chestnuts from a street cart. Daniel Carter walked out of the tall glass doors of the Carlton Hotel, his black overcoat buttoned neatly against the cold. The night air nipped at his face, and his breath rose in small white clouds. Behind him, the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses from the charity gala faded away. He had been there for hours, shaking hands with politicians and business partners, talking about profits and deals. Everyone saw him as the man who had it all, the billionaire who built empires. But inside, he felt a strange emptiness that no amount of money could fill. His driver, a man named Victor, was already waiting by the limousine. The sleek black car shone under the streetlights, its tinted windows hiding the world inside. Daniel slid into the back seat, the soft leather cold against his hands. The car began to glide through the busy streets, passing cafes where couples laughed over steaming mugs and shops still glowing with warm lights. Then the traffic light turned red. The car slowed to a stop near a dark alley. Daniel was glancing absently out the window when something caught his eye. She was sitting on the ground, her back against the brick wall. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, and her arms were wrapped tightly around them as if she was trying to hold herself together. Her coat was too thin for the winter night, its fabric damp and clinging to her small frame. A cardboard sign rested beside her feet. The words were written in shaky black marker. Hungry. Please help. For a moment, Daniel thought she might be asleep. But then she lifted her head, and her hair, messy and wind-blown, fell away from her face. That was when their eyes met. Her eyes were large, dark brown, and full of something Daniel could not name. They were not the desperate eyes of someone begging for coins. They were the eyes of someone who had lost too much, someone who had been stripped of everything and yet still carried quiet dignity. A small paper cup sat near her feet, holding only a few coins. People walked past without looking at her. Some glanced her way, then quickly turned their heads, pretending not to see. The wind picked up, carrying a thin sheet of newspaper down the street. It brushed against her leg, and she didn't even move it away. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, something strange, something almost uncomfortable. He had seen poverty before, of course. He had donated millions to charities. But this was different. Seeing her there, so still and fragile in the cold, made him feel like he was looking at a wound he didn't know how to heal. Victor's voice came from the front seat. "Light's green, sir." Daniel didn't answer right. Away. His gaze was still fixed on the girl in the alley. He wondered how she had ended up there. Had she run away from home, lost her family, lost her job? Was there someone, somewhere, who was missing her? The car began to roll forward and she disappeared from view. But in Daniel's mind, she stayed. The image of her, alone, small, and silent under the harsh city lights, followed him all the way to his penthouse. That night he stood by the wide windows of his living room, staring out at the glittering skyline. His home was warm, silent except for the faint hum of the heater. He had everything. Expensive art on the walls, shelves lined with rare books, a kitchen full of food. And yet, he could not stop thinking about the girl in the alley. When he closed his eyes, he saw her again, her hands red from the cold, the way her hair fell over her face, the quiet strength in her gaze. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But something inside him whispered that he needed to find out. The next morning, as the sun rose pale over the city, Daniel made a decision. He would go back. Not as the billionaire in the limousine, not as the man who signed big checks for charity. He would go back as a man who simply wanted to help, and maybe to understand. The coffee shop. The next day, the city woke under a pale winter sun. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of damp concrete and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Daniel Carter walked down the street without his usual suit and tie. Instead, he wore a dark sweater and an old coat, the kind that didn't shout wealth. He didn't want to draw attention. He didn't want the girl from the alley to see a billionaire. He wanted her to see a person. His expensive shoes clicked against the sidewalk, but he slowed his steps as he approached the place he had seen her last night. His breath formed, little clouds in the air. He scanned the alley, and for a moment, his heart sank. She wasn't there. But then, across the street, he spotted her. She was sitting outside a small coffee shop, huddled close to the wall, holding a paper cup in, both hands as if it was her only source of heat. Steam curled from the cup and her eyes were half closed, like she was trying to memorize the feeling of warmth before it disappeared. Daniel crossed the street, but instead of walking straight to her, he stepped into the coffee shop first. Cowpuss. Bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Inside, it was warm, filled with the smell of roasted coffee beans, vanilla syrup, and fresh pastries. A low jazz tune played from a speaker in the corner. He ordered 2 hot coffees, extra cream, and sugar. Then he bought a bag full of warm croissants, their golden crusts still glistening from the oven. As the cashier handed him the bag, the warmth seeped into his fingers. When he stepped outside, the cold slapped against his face again, but he barely felt it. He walked toward her slowly, as if he was approaching a wild bird that might fly away at any sudden movement. She looked up when his shadow fell across her. Her eyes widened a little in surprise. "I thought you might want these," Daniel said, holding out the coffee and the bag of croissants. His voice was calm, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might refuse. Her fingers, red and chapped from the cold, brushed against his as she took the coffee. The heat made her gasp softly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely, above a whisper. He smiled faintly. "It's nothing." She stared at him for a moment as if trying to figure him out. "Why?" she asked suddenly. Daniel tilted his head. "Why what? Why are you giving me this? Most people just walk past." She looked away, her gaze dropping to the steam rising from the cup. Daniel thought for a second before answering. "Because I think you haven't had someone be kind to you in a long time, and because everyone deserves a warm drink on a cold day." For the first time, he saw her lips curve into the smallest smile. It was shy, almost unsure, but it was there. She pulled the paper cup close to her face and closed her eyes as she took a sip, letting the warmth fill her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said softly, still looking at the coffee as if it might disappear if she looked away. "I'm Daniel," he replied, but he didn't add Carter. He didn't want his name to be a wall between them. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the street moving around them, the rumble of buses, the soft hiss of car tires on wet pavement, the laughter of 2 teenagers walking by. Lily reached into the bag and pulled out a croissant. She took a small bite, chewing slowly, and Daniel could see in her eyes that she was savoring it, not just for the taste, but for the feeling of being cared for. "This is really good," she murmured. "They just came out of the oven," Daniel said, and for some reason the simple conversation felt warmer than the coffee in his hands. He wanted to ask her 100 questions, where she came from, how she ended, up here, what she dreamed about at night, but he didn't. He knew trust wasn't something you could force. It had to be earned, one small kindness at a time. When he stood to leave, She looked up at him with something like curiosity in her eyes. "Will I see you again?" she asked hesitantly, as if she was afraid of the answer. Daniel gave a small nod. "If you want to." Lily hesitated, then nodded back. As Daniel walked away, the winter wind swirled around him, but he didn't feel cold. There was a strange warmth in his chest, not the kind you get from coffee, but the kind you get when you know you've done something that matters, even if it's small. That night, when he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized something. He wanted to see her again, not out of pity, but because, for the first time in years, someone had made him feel alive. The story she never told. The third time Daniel saw Lily, the snow had started to fall. It was the soft kind. Quiet flakes drifting down in slow spirals, melting as soon as they touched the wet pavement. Streetlights turned the snow into floating sparks, and the air smelled of chimney smoke and damp stone. Daniel found her sitting on a wooden bench near the Riverwalk. The coffee shop was behind her, but instead of drinking something warm, she sat with her hands tucked under her arms for warmth. Her head was bowed, her long hair falling forward like a curtain. He approached without speaking, carrying a paper bag and 2 steaming cups. She looked up at the sound of his footsteps. This time, her eyes softened when she saw him. "You're here," she said quietly, almost as if she hadn't expected it. "I told you I would be," Daniel replied, handing her the coffee. "Extra sugar this time. I remember you liked it sweet." A tiny smile touched her lips, and for a moment she seemed younger, like the weight she carried had lifted just enough to let a little light through. She took a sip and closed her eyes, letting the warmth sink in. They sat side by side, the river's dark water moving slowly in front of them. The city noise was faint here, softened by the snow and the sound of the water. "You don't have to keep bringing me things," she said after a while. "I know," Daniel answered, "but I want to." Silence stretched between them. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I used to have a life. A good one." Daniel turned his head slightly, but he didn't press her. He just listened. "I grew up in a small town," she began, her voice steady but low. "My dad was a mechanic. My mom worked at a little bakery. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I loved painting. I used to set up my easel by the lake and try to paint the sunsets. My parents kept every painting, even the bad ones, her." Lips trembled slightly, but she kept going. "Then, when I was 23, my dad had a heart attack. It was so sudden. He didn't make it to the hospital. My mom, she couldn't handle it. She got sick, and the medical bills started piling up. I worked 2 jobs, but it was never enough." Daniel's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "When my mom died, I couldn't afford rent anymore," Lily continued, her eyes fixed on the dark water. "One night I came home and my landlord had changed the locks. I had nowhere to go. I stayed with a friend for a while, but she lost her apartment too. I sold what I could, but it didn't last long. And eventually, I ended up here." The snow kept falling, tiny white flecks landing in her hair and melting instantly. Daniel felt an ache in his chest, one that surprised him with its intensity. "How long has it been?" he asked softly. "Almost 2 years," she said. "You get used to it, but you also don't. Nights are the worst. You try to sleep, but the cold gets into your bones. You keep one eye open because you don't know who might come near, and you wake up every morning wondering if today will be the day you disappear and nobody notices." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly looked away, pretending to sip her coffee. Daniel wanted to say something, to tell her she wasn't invisible, that she mattered, but he knew words could feel empty when the world had taken too much from you. Instead, he reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small sketchbook and a set of pencils. She stared at them, her eyes widening. "For me?" You said you used to paint, Daniel said. I thought maybe you could draw again, even if it's just while you're sitting here. Her fingers hovered over the sketchbook, almost afraid to touch it. Then she took it gently, as if it might break. It's been a long time, she whispered. Then maybe it's time again, Daniel said softly. For the rest of the afternoon, they didn't talk much. Lily sat with her knees drawn up, sketching quietly while the snow fell around them. Daniel sat beside her, sipping his coffee, watching the lines take shape on the paper. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a piece of her finding its way back. As the daylight faded and the city lights began to glow, she looked up at him and said something. He didn't expect. You're the first person in a long time who's stayed. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just met her gaze, the cold wind brushing against both their faces. And in that moment, he knew. He wasn't going anywhere. A gentle offer. The snow turned into a steady fall by evening, coating the streets, in a thin layer of white. Street lamps cast halos of light through the flakes, and the air was so cold it made every breath sting. Daniel walked briskly toward the riverwalk, his gloved hands deep in his coat pockets. He found Lily sitting in the same spot as before, but this time she didn't have coffee to warm her hands. She sat curled up on the bench, her thin coat dusted. With snow, her shoulders trembling from the cold, the sight made something twist painfully inside him. You'll freeze out here, Daniel said as he approached. His voice carried a firmness that surprised even him. Lily looked up slowly, her face pale, lips slightly blue. I'm fine, she whispered. No, you're not, he replied, taking a step closer. Come with me. Her eyes widened, wary. I don't even know where you'd take me. Somewhere warm. Just for tonight, Daniel said gently, kneeling so his eyes met hers. I promise, no questions you don't want to answer, no pressure, just warmth and safety. She hesitated, biting her lip. Snowflakes clung to her hair, and she brushed them away with a trembling hand. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Daniel's answer came without thought. Because everyone deserves a safe place to sleep, and because I can't walk away knowing you'll spend another night out here. Her gaze searched his face, looking for something, maybe a sign that he had hidden motives. But all she saw was sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Okay, just for tonight. Daniel didn't take her to his glass and marble penthouse. He didn't want her to feel out of place or overwhelmed. Instead, he led her to a small boutique hotel tucked away on a quiet street. The lobby was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh linen. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, filling the space with a golden glow. The receptionist gave Daniel a knowing look when he asked for a single room for the night, but he ignored it. He walked Lily up to the room. It was small but cozy. A queen bed with thick blankets, a nightstand with a lamp, and a little window where snow tapped against the glass. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her bag tightly. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to step inside. It's yours for the night, Daniel said softly. She turned to him, her voice hesitant. I've not slept in a real bed in a long time. Then, it's about time you did, Daniel said with a faint smile. There's a hot shower, too. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. For a moment, she looked like she might say no. But then she stepped inside, her feet sinking into the soft carpet, her eyes drinking in the room's warmth. She set her bag down on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her hands into the thick blanket as if testing whether it was real. Thank you, she whispered, not looking at him. Daniel gave a small nod and stepped out, closing the door quietly. Down in the lobby, Daniel sat near the fireplace with a cup of tea he didn't drink. He kept picturing Lily upstairs, maybe standing under the hot shower, maybe sitting wrapped in the blankets. He hoped she could sleep without fear tonight. Hours passed. The snow outside grew heavier, blanketing the street in silence. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps. Lily appeared in the lobby wearing an oversized hotel robe, her damp hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She carried her sketchbook under one arm. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She did, tucking her legs beneath her. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Then she opened her sketchbook and turned it toward him. It was a drawing of the river at night, the streetlights reflected in the water, snow drifting down like falling stars. It was delicate and full of quiet beauty. "You drew this tonight?" he asked. She nodded. "I wanted to remember how the city looks when it's not just cold and harsh, when it's beautiful too." Daniel's chest tightened. She had taken something ordinary, something he saw every day without thinking, and turned it into something worth keeping. "You have a gift," he said quietly. Lily gave a small smile but didn't reply. She just closed the sketchbook and hugged it to her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, the snow whispered against the windows, and in that warm pocket of the world, it felt like time had slowed down. That night, Daniel knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. It was about her. The way she saw the world, the quiet strength in her voice, the fact that she was still creating beauty despite everything she had lost. And as she went back upstairs, whispering a soft good night, he realized he didn't just want to keep her safe for one night. He wanted to keep her safe, always. He unseen change. The days after that snowy night felt different. Daniel still went to work, still sat in meetings, still signed contracts worth millions. But now, when his phone buzzed with another deal, his mind drifted to the small boutique, hotel on the quiet street. He found himself wondering if Lily had eaten, if she had been able to draw that day, if the cold had returned to her bones. Every morning he passed by the hotel before heading to the office. Sometimes she was in the lobby sketching, her hair pulled into a loose braid, her face bent over the paper with full concentration. Other times, she was outside on the bench, watching people hurry past, her sketchbook open on her knees. She still kept her distance in some ways. Her life before him was a place she didn't invite him into often. But there was a change. Small, almost invisible at first, but growing. Her cheeks had more color. Her laugh, though quiet, came a little easier. Her eyes, once dim and guarded, now held brief flickers of light. One afternoon, Daniel found her sitting at a small table in the coffee shop next door. The smell of fresh espresso and baked cinnamon rolls filled the air, mingling with the hum of quiet chatter. She was sketching a little boy playing with a red balloon outside, her pencil moving with a soft, steady rhythm. He walked over and set a cup of coffee in front of her. "Thought you could use a refill," he said. She looked up, smiling faintly. "You keep feeding me coffee. I might get used to it." "That's the plan," Daniel replied, taking a seat across from her. They sipped in silence for a while. Outside, the street was wet from a light rain, the puddles catching the reflections of neon signs. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Before all of this, before the streets." She stared down at her cup for a moment. "Every day," she admitted. "But sometimes, I also miss myself, the me I was back then." Daniel didn't look away from her. "I think she's still here. I see her every time you draw." Something flickered in her eyes, and she quickly looked back at her sketch pad. "You're good at saying things that make people quiet," she murmured. "But There was a faint smile tugging at her lips. That evening, as they walked out of the cafe, the city was glowing with the soft gold of street lamps. A light drizzle hung in the air, cool and fresh. Daniel noticed that she wasn't hugging herself as tightly anymore. Her steps were slower, more relaxed, like she wasn't trying to disappear into the background. Without thinking, he offered his umbrella. She hesitated, then took it. They walked close, the sound of rain pattering gently against the fabric above them. "I used to love the rain," she said quietly. "When I was little, my mom would open the kitchen window so we could smell it while we baked bread. She said it made the bread taste better." Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe she was right. They passed a flower shop with its window fogged. Up from the heat inside, a row of tulips stood in a vase near the glass, bright yellow against the gray evening. Without a word, Daniel stepped inside and bought one. He handed it to her when he came out. Her brows lifted. "Why?" He shrugged lightly. "Because it's not coffee." She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and for Daniel it was the best sound he'd heard in years. Weeks passed. Lily stayed at the hotel for now, though she never asked for more than she needed. She spent her days drawing, sometimes selling small sketches to tourists by the river. She began eating better, walking with more energy. Daniel saw all these changes without pointing them out, but inside, he was becoming aware of something else, something that scared him more than he wanted to admit. Somewhere between coffee, cups, and quiet walks, between laughter in the rain and silent moments by the river, he had fallen in love with her. It wasn't the kind of love born out of pity or some sense of rescuing. No, it was the way she noticed beauty in places most people ignored, the way she carried dignity despite everything she had lost, the way she could make a cracked sidewalk or a rainy street feel like part of a painting. But with that love came fear. She still didn't know who he really was, Daniel Carter, billionaire CEO. He had kept his last name from her on purpose, afraid that once she learned the truth, the fragile trust between them might shatter. Late one night, as he sat in his penthouse staring at the city skyline, he realized something. Secrets had a way of finding the light, and when they did, they either made bonds stronger or tore them apart. The truth. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the city feel softer. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the streetlights, settling on rooftops and the hoods of parked cars. The boutique hotel's lobby smelled faintly, of fresh bread from the bakery across the street, and the only sound was the slow crackle of the fireplace. Daniel sat in one of the armchairs near the fire, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. He had been waiting for Lily to come down. Tonight, he wasn't here for coffee or sketches. Tonight, there was something he needed to say, something that had been pressing against his chest for weeks. Footsteps approached. Lily appeared at the top of the small staircase, wearing her thick sweater and a scarf he had bought her 2 days ago. She carried her sketchbook under one arm, as always. When she saw him, her lips curved into that small, warm smile he had come to know so well. "You're early," she said as she joined him by the fire. "Couldn't sleep," Daniel admitted. "Thought maybe I'd find you here." She sat across from him, curling her legs under her, the firelight painting gold in her hair. "You look worried," she said softly. Daniel took a deep breath. The heat from the fireplace warmed his face, but his palms felt cold. "Lily, there's something I haven't told you, and you deserve to know." Her brows drew together. "What is it?" He set the mug down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "When I first met you, I didn't tell you my full name. I didn't want you to see me as anything other than a man offering coffee to someone who needed it. But the truth is, I'm Daniel Carter." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if the name pulled at a memory. I I've seen that name, she said slowly. On a building downtown, on magazines in the newsstand. He nodded once. I own Carter Enterprises. I'm a billionaire. Silence settled between them, heavy and sharp. Lily sat back in her chair, her fingers tightening on her sketchbook. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the fire. Why didn't you tell me? She asked finally, her voice low. Daniel's throat felt tight. Because I didn't want money to be the first thing you thought about when you saw me. I didn't want you to think I was helping you out of guilt, or that I was trying to buy your trust. I just wanted to know you. As you are. Her gaze dropped to the floor. And all this time, you could have given me more than coffee and a hotel room. You could have fixed everything. Daniel's voice softened. Maybe I could have, but I didn't want to take away your choices. I didn't want to make you feel like you owed me something. I just wanted to be here until you were ready to decide what you wanted for yourself. Her lips parted, but no words came. The firelight flickered across her face, catching the shine in her eyes. He stood slowly, moving to kneel in front of her. Lily, the truth is I care about you, more than I thought I could care about anyone. I don't care about where you've been or what you've lost. I care about who you are right now. The woman who laughs in the rain, who sees beauty in cracked sidewalks, who still makes art in a world that tried to take everything from her. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly brushed it away. Do you know what it feels like? She whispered. To think no one in the world sees you, and then realize someone has been looking all along? Daniel's own voice broke. Maybe not, but I know what it feels like to have everything and still feel empty. Until I met you. Her hand trembled as she reached up and touched his cheek. The warmth of her fingers was enough to make his chest ache. You should have told me sooner, she said, her voice shaking. But thank you for not letting the money come first. Daniel covered her hand with his own, holding it there. I'm here, Lily, and I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight, not ever. Unless you ask me to. For the first time since the night in the alley, she smiled without hesitation. It wasn't small or cautious. It was full, warm, and lit her whole face. In that quiet lobby, with the snow falling outside and the fire glowing between them, Daniel realized this wasn't the end of their story. This was only the beginning, and whatever came next, they would face it together.